All right, so we continue our journey of top fails, and today that starts off with the top 15 fails of refugiums and all the mistakes that we've made, starting with number 1.
Number 1 is assuming that you need a big, giant refugium for your tank, and you don't. These are very, very effective. So I think when I was first researching refugiums, and I think measure-wise, from a 125-gallon tank, I had this mentality that I needed like a 4-foot by 4-foot massive thing to cover the nutrients coming out of my tank, the nitrates and the phosphates, the food going in, the waste produced. I need this massive thing, but it turns out I don't.
Yeah, I think that's really left over from an era where we were lighting it with a 10-watt bulb or whatever, incandescent bulb or fluorescent bulb, and in that case, man, I do need a pretty big surface area. But now, if I can increase the rate of photosynthesis by 4, I can actually shrink it down to 1/4 the size.
Yeah,
right?
true.
And so today's technology and approaches just do not require huge areas to be effective. In fact, one of the problems has really been coming up in the last few years is they're kind of too effective. Yeah. So one of the biggest fails is actually maybe missing out on all of the advantages by assuming you need a gigantic one, and you absolutely don't. And in fact, if you went too big, maybe you're having too big of a problem, like stripping all the nutrients out. So that is one of the biggest fails I've seen with refugiums for sure. All right, so number 2, and arguably this could have been number 1 actually.
It could have, yeah.
Is, what is it?
It's getting chaeto from somebody else's tank. Chaeto, macroalgae, anything like that, whatever's non-clean chaeto, non-sterile type chaeto. So I go to my buddy's house, he's got a thriving refugium, and I rip a whole chunk out of there. I now have all of his aptasia problems, bristleworm problems, pests, all of these different things that can come from the tank. If I'm worried about getting my frags from other people's tanks without dipping them and doing this other thing, I should definitely be worried about what's in the chaeto.
Yeah, so chaeto is probably the worst offender. I don't know why it is, but every pest likes to live inside of this gunk, or it gets caught up in it or whatever. And so when you grab a tank, grab out of your buddy's tank and put it in your tank, you just got everything that he has.
Oh yeah.
I just assume that every nasty critter, you just introduce your tank in the fastest way possible, right? I've seen it enough times. I would never, ever, ever do this again myself. We watched my mistake with the 160. I wouldn't do that again. I pulled it from somebody's tank here I thought was clean. There really wasn't a lot of clean options back then, but now there is.
Now there is, right? Yeah. Now there's options where you get sterile and quarantined and grown and then regrown in quarantine system so that there's no pests.
Yeah, so a system that's actually never ever, the chaeto's grown in a system that's never ever seen a fish or a coral or any of those things, right? It's just seawater and some sterile chaeto that's grown out. So Algae Barn is the de facto number 1 in this. I trust them. I've used it in all kinds of different tanks. And so it's not that you're never going to get any of those worms or whatnot, but we took this ball out of another tank over here and I can just see all over. I can count, a dozen different bristle worms all over just with the naked eye, right? And so you just don't want all this stuff in your tank. Algae Barn is probably one of the best places to pick that up. They've recently expanded. We now stock all their stuff, so you can pick up some Algae Barn while you're picking up some carbon or whatnot. But that is absolutely, if there's only one thing that you heard today, it is absolutely start with clean chaeto. Don't introduce all those pests to your tank. You just do not want them in your tank. All right, so number 3 fail of refugiums
is, okay, so not enough chaeto. And this is one that I've seen so many times on the Ask BRStv Facebook group and different forum posts and stuff, and it's people that have the proper lighting, they have the chaeto, and they you have say a 100 gallon system or a 120 gallon system, and they ask the question why isn't my chaeto growing, and it's the size of a golf ball or the size of maybe a baseball or something, and it's just not giving the chaeto enough surface area or enough chaeto to handle the amount of what you're asking it to do. So not enough chaeto.
a golf ball chaeto is not going to outcompete nutrients in your entire rest of your tank.
No.
That's just never going to happen. Eventually, that golf ball of chaeto will grow out over the next 6 months into something that covers over the whole refugium. But because you're blasting the light in there, you don't be surprised you fill it with hair algae and all kinds of other stuff.
Right.
So like start with as much as you can afford, right? And it might seem silly that you're spending, 60, 70 bucks on chaeto or whatnot, but like this might be the most effective filter on the entire tank. Like no other filter on the tank really is going to like potentially reduce your nitrate and phosphate levels to near or at zero, right?
Yeah.
So like it's super effective. It's worth the 70 bucks.
Yeah, and it might be the last 70 bucks you spend on chaeto too, because it grows and perpetuates, and all you're doing at that point is if it's growing for you, you're just harvesting and pulling off. So it may be a one-time investment for some people.
I think about it like a tree.
Yeah.
Right? I buy a tree for my house. I could buy this little teeny tree that's going to take forever to turn into one, or I could just start bigger.
Yeah,
right?
true.
And in this case, the tree is actually performing a function in my tank. So start bigger, and you'll be happier. And related to that also is kind of like turn the lights on too early. So number 4 is that turn the lights on too early.
Yeah, too early. So establishing. So we found this on the ULM tanks. It seemed that from day one we saw how effective a refugium could be on like a mature system like the BRS 160. So we thought, hey, ultra low maintenance, we can start this thing off with a full-fledged refugium with proper lighting and all that, and it actually didn't work out.
No, it did not. And so this is what I would say is you cannot grow the stuff in an environment that has zero source of nitrogen or phosphorus. It just won't grow. So, and it'll probably just die and then just cause a whole bunch of other problems in your tank. If it dies, it's actually sending nutrients into the tank.
Yeah.
So what you can do though is put your fish in there. In today's environment, most people are not turning their lights on right away,
Right.
and they have a tank full of fish for a couple of months first. The nitrate and phosphorus levels will start to rise, and then turn your chaeto light on and blow the chaeto in there. And before you turn the lights on the tank, you can actually reduce those things back down again.
True.
So it fights algae in your tank. So putting it in there too early, like before you actually have a healthy amount of fish and a source of food in there, is probably one of the bigger fails out there, and I'd absolutely avoid that. All right, so number 5 fail with refugiums, what is it?
There's a couple things here: overlighting and underlighting. So overlighting, when it comes down, so we tested the PAR on this thing, and this is it's a turn it on, and it's the power of the sun. And if I don't use like how high it's mounted off of the thing, I'm overlighting I'm effectively killing my chaeto, my refugium, with an overabundance of PAR and light, intense light. On the opposite side of that, if I'm not using a specific light designed for this type of purpose, like my little CFO bulb from the hardware store that I spent 15 bucks on, I'm underlighting my chaeto, and it's not performing the function I would need it to.
Yeah, so this is what it'll look like. Overlighting it, it'll look kind of like a coral. It'll start to bleach out and die, right? Underlighting it will look like a really deep shade of pink on your nitrate test kit. And so you're not getting the usefulness out of it when you're underlighting. Overlighting, you're actually killing it. And so overlighting can be addressed in a handful of different ways.
Right.
One, the biggest one is just raise the thing up above it. It's higher, and you'll reduce the amount of PAR. You can actually like put a shading sheet in there for a second, or a week, and kind of slow it down. If it has the ability to adjust the intensity, like the AI Fuge has that, you can just adjust it down. If it has an acclimation mode, use it or whatnot. But yeah, you can actually adjust the intensity of these things, and just by height or whatnot. You can also just do it by the amount of time that it's on.
Yes.
Right? So
Yeah.
like,
Reduce
don't
the
start
photo
off
frame.
at 12 hours. You can start off at 6 and add an hour every week, and build on. So underlighting, one of the bigger fails out there. Over being the worst is super obvious because the
Probably.
stuff just dies.
Yep.
All right, so that leads directly into the number 6 fail. What is it?
That is not tuning your light for that under or overlighting or underperformance, and in some cases the chaeto working too well. So a lot of these new lights, like the Kessel H160, the Prime Fuge, and a bunch of these other ones are LEDs. So LEDs inherently we can turn them up and we can turn them down. And I'd say in a lot of the cases, turning it down or in acclimation mode is probably where you want to start and where most people will use it.
Yeah, so this is a filter and it's totally tunable, and
Yeah.
you just need to understand how, right? And so like a lot of these guys, again, you can just tune it by the amount of hours it's on, or you can tune it by the intensity.
Right.
But like what this light is doing is providing photosynthetic energy, right? Which is going to increase the rates of photosynthesis, which will increase the nitrogen and phosphorus uptake in the algae. So when I crank it up, I'm going to soak up nitrogen and phosphorus from the tank faster. When I turn the light and power down, it'll happen slower,
Yeah.
right? And so like if I find that I am not getting enough nitrogen and phosphorus out of the tank, I can actually just extend the photo period. I can actually increase the light intensity if that option is available. And I can do the inverse too.
Yeah.
You know, if I get it's like totally like zero nitrate, zero phosphate. My corals are all pale. It's super obvious it's an issue. What do I do?
Yeah, so we found this with the 160 where the light was just, the chaeto and light was working so well that it even came down to the point where it's, all right, now we need to overfeed because we're not producing enough nitrogen and phosphorus for this tank. And even then it's like, okay, so now I'm feeding so heavily, I just can't maintain that. And still I'm pulling too much out. So this is where I can dial back my light. And now I don't need to consider things like, you know, a nitrogen source of dosing nitrates or dosing phosphates to the tank, adding more complexity to the tank because I have to dose to it. I can just turn my light down and it stops pulling so much from my tank.
Yeah, we are actually running it like only 3 days a week at one point in
Yeah.
time, right? So you can tune this filter to do exactly what you want to do it by adjusting the intensity and the amount of times that it's on. And I'll just share with you, like we said earlier, this Fuge is only this big on a 160-gallon tank, right? And so like it isn't all that big. It just has a really high-powered light on it. And even at only 3 days a week, man, we're running 0-0. And so they can be too good, and you can just adjust how you use it to the desired effect. So number one fail is a lot of people just turn the thing on for 12-12 and like never look back and don't really understand that this is a totally tunable filter. All right, so number 7 fail with Refugiums. This one's also super common. What is it?
This one is not putting a filter sock before your Refugium. So mechanical filtration is capturing all of this detritus particles, uneaten food and things like that. And with your drain going directly into your chaeto, in your chaeto Refugium chamber, that stuff ends up in the bottom of the chamber. And in the case of the 160, our chaeto grows so thick and so massive that it's an effort. You have to make a mental effort to go down there and vacuum out the pockets of detritus and whatnot down below.
The chaeto forms like a super thick mesh that effectively looks like or functions like a filter itself, right? So if you don't filter out all of that uneaten poo and food and whatever, it actually just gets stuck right in the chaeto and then turns into detritus and just makes a total mess out of that area, right? And so it is absolutely valuable to remove all that stuff before it gets into the chaeto. So that's one of the biggest fails as well. So leading right into that is actually number 8 fail with Refugiums.
Not cleaning the sump. And if you start to get different competing algae that are growing on top of or inside the same the chamber as your chaeto, not cleaning that stuff out, letting it grow.
So Josh over at Worldwide said something to me that I never really heard, and I just hadn't thought about it this way, is you never let your tank look like crap, so why do you let your sump look like crap? And build up all of this detritus and stuff in it. All of that junk down there is polluting the tank the same way it'd be polluting it if it was in the display.
Right.
So, and I've just seen it now enough times where if you take care of the sump the same way you take care of the display benefits it. And like, I am totally convinced on this one. So if you suck up all that garbage out of there, specifically though in the Refugium, because the Refugium again, like, tends to collect all that stuff. This like mesh, forms and it just collects it all and then it just goes to the bottom. So, get some of the chaeto out of the way and siphon it all out. You can even, like, sometimes what I'll do is really shake up all the chaeto and get the stuff out and then just drain it all the way down, right? And suck out all the water out of there and get as much of it out of there as I can. And a cleaner sump and a cleaner Refugium will result in a cleaner and more thriving reef tank and display. Very close to that is actually the number 9 fail. This is another one I see all the time.
Not harvesting your chaeto. So, I mean, this stuff is growing constantly and it can grow so thick. I remember telling people at times how surprised I was at how it grew in the BRS 160, where we have this like 14 by 16 by like another 14 deep chamber, and it was, I could almost walk across it, was so thick from top to bottom. Really needed to be harvested, and harvesting, you know, also allows for that stuff that's underneath that you, if you don't get to churn it over, and specifically if you don't have like a ball that's moving over, it gives you the opportunity to remove that stuff that might end up dying underneath.
Yeah, and it is. And so what you'll see is the stuff that's visible to the glass tends to stay alive, and even like kind of all the way down. But then you can kind of find pockets where it's just totally deteriorating as well. So like really, man, you only need a handful of inches of this stuff floating on the top. And if you get past that, I think, you know, you're probably going to run into some problems over time. You won't really know where it shows up. But in general, it's just a good idea to keep that stuff generally harvested. You don't need it to be a mat that is 14 inches deep. Really, it's only getting lit from the top and probably 6 inches below that as it whittles its way through. So not harvesting is actually one of the biggest fails as well. I think we're all been like an offender here. So make sure to periodically go in there, just grab a handful out and throw it in the trash. Okay, so again, number 10, leading right after that one. What is the biggest fail of grabbing some with your hand, throwing in the trash?
Reaching in there with your bare hands. So I am guilty of this all the time. I hardly ever use gloves, and I pay the price for it almost every single time.
I watched you do it with this one.
I did it with this one. I went to the studio and grabbed a mass of our test algae that we have in some test tanks back there, hand carried it back over there, stuck it in this tank, and now we're looking at it, and there's just a mass amount of bristleworms and things in there. And I've got some red spots on my hand because I didn't wear gloves. So don't reach in there with your bare hands. Just put a glove on and grab some stuff out.
I actually saw him look at his hand after he put it in there, like, oh man. So yeah, there's all kinds of stuff in there.
Yeah.
And like, you know, I actually grabbed a filter sock once that had all kinds of bristleworms in there, and I pulled it out, my thumb looked fuzzy, and it hurt for a long time. So like the same thing could here. If you got a really big one and you grabbed onto it, man, like, get ready for pain. And so like you don't want any of that stuff on your skin. So grab a glove, grab you know, I don't know, anything, and just to get it out of there. Don't do it with your hands because there's so often all kinds of negative critters in there. So biggest fail is a thumb full of bristleworms. So number 11 refugium fail.
This one is worrying about the copepods, and don't worry about the copepods. I think I've seen this a lot. It is true that we have, the refugium allows for an area for microfauna and things like copepods to grow and thrive, but the impact that you personally have, whether you harvest a chunk out, whether it's upstream from your skimmer or return pump and you're worried about your copepods getting in there, one, the population of copepods in that microfauna is probably so massive that the little minute things that you do to it is not going to affect it. And two, a lot of times they're living so deep into that, you know, chaeto mass that worrying about your skimmer in the refugium chamber, in the chamber next to it, is really not a concern at all because they are just fine and happy inside the mass of chaeto.
Just don't spend a ton of time worrying about this.
No.
System design based on copepods. It is going to be a place where all kinds of different pods flourish, and they will make their way through the return pump into your tank, and almost nothing that you do, you know, short of, I don't even know how you could truly prevent them from making it. UV sterilizers are not going to affect something that large either. There's just all this time spent in thinking about these pods, and the pods are going to thrive. I don't think that you could prevent them from like populating the tank, short of predators actually.
True.
The only thing out there is the things that eat the pods all day long and hunt them down for a living. Those can have a distinct impact. But outside of that, I don't think you could prevent the pods in there regardless. Just don't spend a whole lot of time. Know that your refugium is going to actually help booster that population. You can actually pick up, you know, like different species of pods if you want to boost it, you know, from algae barn and whatnot. But like, I just wouldn't spend a whole lot of time about system design. Don't overthink it, because it's probably not going to produce a whole lot of results. All right, so number 12, this one's probably going to catch a few people off guard because I don't think a lot of people think about this one. So what is the number 12 fail of refugiums?
Yeah, this one is not considering the elemental uptake that a mass of growing algae has in your tank. And there's full-fledged systems designed around specifically that, like the Triton method that has a bunch of extra elements in there specifically designed for what's being taken out by the algae.
So I'd call the Triton method actually like a 2 or 4 part.
Yeah.
Made for refugiums.
Right.
You can do the water change thing if you want or don't want, doesn't matter. But like it's a 4 part that's designed and knows that you're using a refugium for nutrient uptake and exporting nitrogen and phosphorus from the tank. And then you actually have to replace things like iron and stuff because there's a way bigger uptake of that, and then there won't be there'll be a deficient level for your corals.
Right.
And if you doubt that, find an SCP or ICP test, send it in, and you can look at your tank and say, oh wow, no, my iron's just fine, or it's way depleted. And it's probably the second one. But
For
outside of that,
us,
outside of that, if you're just using whatever 2 or 4 part or kalkwasser or whatever you want to use, there's also options out there like the chaeto grow from Brightwell here, and it replaces those types of things that algae tends to uptake, and when you're exporting. So there's potassium, boron, carbon, calcium, chlorine, manganese, magnesium, molybdenum, and cobalt, nickel, sulfur, zinc, all those things that like growing organisms like plants uptake and would be deficient for the corals and the zooxanthellae that live within them. In this case, we're just going to replace it. So one of the biggest fails is not thinking about like the organism's needs inside the tank and how some of these natural biofilters work, and then replacing them. And then probably once a year or so, sending in that ICP, making sure that we're on track. This is specifically important if you're got a huge investment into a lot of acropora and really expensive corals, like because a $50 test kit, making sure that all the chemistry is way out of line on something like that is like a total no-brainer. If I got a handful of zoanthids and a couple of torch corals and stuff in there, I probably. They survive in a lot of different environments. Probably not worth it. But if you spend a lot of money on your corals, you really care about them, and you just don't want to see things deteriorate, because nutrient deficiency tends to not show up in you can't watch it. It's not like a person that'll tell you I don't feel good. What happens is one day it starts losing tissue. That's where you see it. So, being track of chemistry is part of reefing, and making sure that you're replacing the things that, in this case, one of your filters is uptaking, so it's available for your corals. All right, so number 13, this is actually going to be an interesting one, is the biggest fail with refugiums, number 13?
Yeah, this is using GFO, biopellets, carbon dosing in general, and also expecting your refugium to live and thrive and live. This is another one, I think that some beginners who are kind of thinking about these filtration. I know when I was a beginner, I read all of these filtration approaches, and my understanding of it was I needed to implement all of them, or I could implement all of them. So I wanted the biopellet reactor, I wanted the GFO, I wanted all, everything under the sun I wanted to do. And then you come to find out, as you progress and learn, that this is a very specific filter that can handle, the phosphorus and the nitrogen levels in your tank. Opposite of that, you could also choose another option like GFO and carbon dosing, or it's a variety of different tools attacking the same job. I just need to pick one tool, or a tool that works for me.
Yeah, so if I use GFO and I strip out all the phosphates, so hair algae doesn't grow in my tank, don't be surprised when this doesn't grow either.
That's true.
And then, like you said, you're using this for nutrient control. I don't need 15 ways to do nutrient control. This one's perfect on its own.
Yeah.
It is going to achieve your goal on its own. And rather than spend a ton of money on all these different things, I'd probably just get the right light for the right tool for the right job. In this case, the right light. And so, yeah, man, you don't want to be carbon dosing. It's not to say you can't run 15 different ways to control nutrients in the tank. I'm just saying you don't need to.
No.
And if the other ones are effective and the carbon dosing and related bacteria stripping out all the nitrogen and phosphorus from the tank really rapidly, don't be surprised when your chaeto really doesn't take off, right?
Yeah.
And then you're gonna start to question which one of the, I don't know, none of these kind of work the way that I was hoping. And then if this one's working super great and I'm adding all this carbon dosing, and the bacteria don't have any food source to uptake it, what's happening to the organic carbon levels in the tank? So I just probably wouldn't run all of those things together, or at least if I'm running into challenges, I would definitely understand why that's happening. All right, so number 14 fail related to refugiums, what is it?
And that's consideration for medications and bacteria while having a refugium. So there are medications out there that are directly impact algae growth in the tank. There are bacterias out there, heterotrophic ones, that are understood to eat, algae or consume those type of live organisms. And I wouldn't be surprised if it might have an impact on this.
Almost certainly does, to some degree. So like, the fluconazoles of the world and those kinds of things that go after algae and remove them, like, don't be surprised if it has an impact on your chaeto.
Yeah.
The vibrants and different things out there, like, they tend to go after the easiest algae in the tank, like the hair algae and stuff like that. But don't be surprised if it impacts, some of the more robust macroalgae like the chaetomorpha as well. So, that just means you're not necessarily like you can't use these things together, but know what you're doing and like watch for challenges. And one of the things is if I'm going to run like the fluconazole or vibrant or whatnot in my tank, and like I want to get rid of bryopsis in the tank per se, or turf algae or bubble algae or whatever, like I can just take this filter offline. Yeah. Right. And so I can take all the chaetomorpha out of there, throw it into a garbage can, throw a couple of shrimp in there and a pump and a heater, and it'll be just fine. And then as soon as I'm done with the treatment in my tank and I've removed all of the bryopsis or whatever I was trying to get out of the tank, I can throw the chaetomorpha back in my refugium and get it back online, right? So you don't have to necessarily, it's not one or the other, you just have to know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and just make some wise decisions. So I would say number 14 fail is absolutely not knowing what you're doing when you're using medications and bacterias, and then watching for it and being able to react or preempt any of those issues. Number 15, this is an interesting one, and I see it all the time as well. Big fail with refugiums.
Light spillage. So a couple different things here. Like when we were at Sean's house at the 2,000-gallon tank, he had taken like some black plastic and wrapped it around his big giant like SRO 9000 Reef octopus skimmer. And it was because of one reason, and that was the light that he had over his mangrove type refugium type place was growing algae inside of his skimmer. And I've seen it on other systems where it's growing on another chamber, pieces of equipment, specifically like the skimmer that stands up usually tall and kind of is in that path of the light. There are some products out there that some people have made for, I think Devon Reef Dudes or somebody has made for these prime fuges in place and things, where it's a clip-in like shades, vents, almost barn doors if you're in that, where you can direct where that light spillage goes. But being considerate of light spillage is pretty important.
I don't think anybody wants to grow algae in their sump.
No.
Right, and not inside equipment. I don't want to clean algae out of my skimmer or whatnot. And so just use some black plastic like acrylic or whatnot and barn door it in. If you have an adjustable light, you can also like just kind of bring it down to the point that like it's not getting splashed on and whatnot, but also not spilling over into the other area. So this is super, super popular refugium thing. If you want to make sure that you're not getting too much spill into other areas, because you don't want to grow hair algae or any other type of algae in your filtration area or sump. All right, so if I had one takeaway from all of this, it's absolutely use sterile algae from places like Algae Barn. You do not want, all the pests that came out of your buddy's tank or even the fish store's tank. And you also need to know that this is a tunable filter. You can adjust the effectiveness of it by increasing the intensity, decreasing it, raising or lowering the light, even just changing the time that the light's on or the amount of days that it's on. It's a tunable filter to achieve your goals. And like every other filter out there, keep it clean and it will perform better for you.
If you want to see the experiments that has driven a lot of these conversations and tips and mistakes that we found firsthand, you can catch all of those in this very special playlist with everything Refugium right over here.